Okay, Photo Africa. This is Dr. Wanda Mahlatsi, the President of the United African Transformation. I have to put it clear. UAT never left the Progressive Caucus, but the UAT was invited for presentation. The ANC called us to present their case and say, we want you to participate, to be an active participant in the GNU. So the UAT never left the GNU. We have never been part of the GNU. You can go to all the archives, you can go to our media platforms. We have never announced that we are part of GNU. So let's put it clear. The UAT is still part of the Progressive Caucus, right from the beginning to date. Kanimamo.
President. They didn't get anything. Very strategic position, tactical that they've taken as a party. So you do have parties like that. UAT, once they didn't get anything, they left with their afro. So I'm gonna so
good morning again. As you all heard last night that the Secretary of the ANC indicated that they will be speaking to the UAT. I can confirm they haven't spoken to us. And even if they wanted to speak to us, we wouldn't speak to them as an individual or as a UAT. We'll speak to them as collective, because as collective we are about 13%. It's a fact that the ANC are 40%, they need 11. And we have 13 here. If they were really progressive and respect the programs of Africans, they would definitely give us an ear, because there is no way we can reverse our gains by voting with the DA and others. So this is our position. We are waiting for them as collective, not as UET.
You know, when people were being sworn in today, others cannot even pronounce conscientiously. It's very difficult. Conscientiously. It's very difficult. I had a difficulty myself when I became the deputy minister for the first time to pronounce that word, conscientiously. But that oath is loaded.
And to perform the functions of my office conscientiously, that's okay, and the best of my ability. Conscientiously, actually.
We'll get it right. We'll get it right.
I guess
we'll get it right. Conscientiously.
Conscientiously.
Yes.
Conscientiously.
Yes. Okay.
You are not going to be able to do anything as the ANC without the approval of the DA. And I'm saying that because if 60%, because this document says where consensus is not possible, the principle of sufficient consensus must apply. Sufficient consensus exists when parties representing 60% of the seats in the National Assembly agree, as you've stated. So you already have 40%. The DA has 20%. You could very well put up a position in cabinet, for instance, where the IFP agree with you, the PA, the PAC, Good Party agrees with you, but that's not enough for you to pass that. You are still going to need the approval of the Democratic Alliance for the decisions that you make.
No, consensus and sufficient consensus is a deadlock breaking mechanism where there is an issue on the table and there is no agreement. But it does not in itself hamstring the functioning of cabinet in terms of decision making.
Yes, and that's the point I'm making, that for it to be a decision, 60%, if there's no consensus, have to agree to that. You don't have that 60% with the IFP, the Good Party, the PAC. You need the DA to rubber stamp every time that there's a deadlock. For there to be 60% consensus, you need the DA to rubber stamp that. Without their numbers, you can't have a legitimate decision that you say this is a result of sufficient consensus.
No, it is incorrect. Cabinet does not function on the basis outside the realm of the constitutional prescript. And the question of goodwill in terms of functioning and smooth functioning and putting together the GNU government, it means where there are contradictions and issues that need to be resolved will be resolved by sufficient consensus.
If, as the government of the government of national unity, you're working on a statement, you're discussing what's happening in the Middle East, you believe as the ANC that you must characterize as cabinet what's happening in the Middle East as genocide. The Democratic Alliance, with their 20% in that cabinet, say we don't agree with that. That's a deadlock, right? So for you, for the president to come out and say this is an approved cabinet decision and I'm communicating it, when there has been a deadlock where the ANC says it's a genocide in the Middle East, the DA says it is not. Are you saying that even when the DA has said no with their 40%, the president can still come out and take that decision as sufficient and having been agreed by the collective, and it's still a legitimate decision that is reached to after consensus?
We are not talking about a negotiated political settlement here. We have long moved out of that. This is a GNU with special characteristics, where in which we talk about the normal operation and functioning of government, which in itself is not hamstrung by the fact that for every cabinet member and decision to be taken, it will at all material times be subjected to disagreement. So the question is, should that actually arise, determined by the number of political parties that are there that participate? We have then put the question of sufficient consensus to arrive at a decision.
I agree with you, which is why in the beginning I didn't say every single cabinet decision. Of course, let's say 80% or 90% of the times you guys are going to agree. But the reality is there are policy differences, which is why I'm using the national minimum wage for a reason. I'm using the war in the Middle East for a reason, because that's where you don't see eye to eye. So in that 1 or 5% where you have fundamental differences in policy, how do you deal with it? That's
the minimum wage cannot be reversed.
Yeah, but that's it. I'm saying, what if you want to increase it by 1 rand? The DA doesn't believe in that.
The question is, there is no party that has got the veto power within the government of national unity. So for us to agree, it means that we put a threshold not of a single party. You must understand the 60% how it operates. Start with 50%, which would have included, if it was a grand coalition, 2 parties. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we have broadened that, reflective of the parties that are in the National Assembly to participate in the GNU, you have then raised the threshold to 60%. So it means of those parties that participate, that will determine broadly a bigger decision that needs to be taken within government.
And you as the ANC with 40%, let's say you've got the IFP, the DA, the PAC, the Good Party, that still doesn't give you 50%, does it? You need the DA. That's the point I'm trying to make.
It might as well happen that the DA disagrees, but I'm saying it does not have the veto power from not saying the decision cannot be taken. The threshold of 60% is of all the parties which will be participating.
And I'm saying you don't have the threshold of 60%. Put the DA aside. Take you, IFP, PAC, Good Party, PA. You don't have 50%. There's not much you can do on your own. At the end of the day, you are going to need the DA, even if it's just 10 members of the DA. You're going to need them in order to deal with any deadlock that you may have.
When you constitute government and you talk about 60% and political parties broadly that participate, the determination of the decisions, how they are taken in terms of cabinet, at the end of the day, should there be any other deadlock with regard to the executive, the deadlock breaking mechanism at your disposal is to negotiate and engage in a sufficient consensus. But it does not apply in terms of decision making such that a party can have a veto power over the executive decision making process. The question that must be interrogated, which is what I think you are in a hurry to make a determination about the DA having veto powers, is that a single political party cannot stop the operations of the executive in this, unless institutionalized and reflected in the constitution of the country that that veto power, it is acceptable.
And the executive is the government of national unity, it's not the ANC, right?
The government of national unity is of all
Yes.
parties that participate.
Which is why you need an agreement. So as the ANC, when you say you can't stop the operations of the executive is not the ANC. The executive is the government of national unity. That's why those people need to agree. At the very least, 60% of them must agree. So but let's move on from it. I'm going to bring in Helen Ziller, because Helen Ziller actually told me that the ANC is not going to be able to do anything without 60%. They have 20%, you have 40%. The document you have signed says if there's a deadlock, at least 60% of parties must agree. And unfortunately for you as the ANC, the IFP, the Good Party, the PA, all the other smaller parties don't give you 60%. At the end of the day, you need the DA to come and rubber stamp whatever decision you're going to make. That's what's according to the document you've signed.